In this ASMR clip, I will read for you the 10th epic novel, Captain Underpants. And all of this in ASMR style. RSMR Katz. Hello my beloved Captain Underpants fans. My name is ASMR Katz and I will read now for you the 10th epic novel from Captain Underpants. If you ask yourself why I am already at the 10th of these books, I wrote all the other books as well, and you can find them in a playlist here all around. So before you make yourself comfortable, check all the other clips and then see if you already see them all before, and I would recommend you to start at 1 and then go with me book by book, chapter through chapter, until you are with me here at the last book from this episode from Captain Underpants. If you not already have, feel also free to follow me, to subscribe, to click on the notification bell, and to comment under all my videos, because with every support from you, I have the opportunity to grow and to show you my world of ASMR. And this is not all what I do. I also have a lot of different other video clips you can see all around the World Wide Web. So if you are curious, search for me and you will find your way, because the World Wide Web is my playground and you are invited to play with me. When you ask yourself why I have these headphones in my ear, this is a high quality recording, and I just can recommend you to put your headphones in as well, because then you hear the amazing sound of ASMR and have the ability to relax, let go, and enjoy just the moment of being. And now we start. Captain Underpants and the Revolting Revenge of the Radioactive Robo-Boxers, the 10th epic novel by Dav Pilkey. Help! The world is in big, big trouble. Maybe the comic book on the next page will help to straighten things out. The top secret truth about Captain Underpants. Once upon a time, there was 2 cool kids named George and Herald. They had a really mean principal named Mr. Crump. One day, they hypnotized him. They made him believe he was a superhero. It was fun at first, but then Mr. Crump jumped out of the window. Mr. Crump really thought he was Captain Underpants. He got in lots of trouble. One time, a big monster attacked the school. It tried to eat Mr. Crump. George found some superpower juice in an UFO. Then Mr. Crump got superpowers. How he can even fly and stuff. The worst part is, whenever Mr. Crump hears somebody snap their fingers, he turns into Captain Underpants. And whenever Captain Underpants gets water on his head, he turns back into Mr. Crump. So anyways, in our last adventure, there was an evil guy named Tippy Tinkle Trousers. He built a big robot suit. Then he climbed inside. They got in a big fight. Tippy accidentally froze his feet to the ground. But Tippy's robot pants was also a time machine. Tippy robot pants went back in time 5 years ago. But some bullies saw the robot pants and got scared. They got so scared they all went bonkers. Mr. Crab got blamed for the whole thing. Now, the future is changed. Everything is different. Since Mr. Crab got fired 5 years ago, he never got hypnotized by George and Herald. Since Mr. Crab didn't get hypnotized, he never turned into Captain Underpants. Since Captain Underpants doesn't exist, he wasn't there to save the world. Tippy realized his mistake when he came back to the present. Tippy vowed to make things right. But then, who will save now us? Chapter 1. George and Herald. This is George Beard and Harold Hutchins. George is a giant zombie nerd on the left with the tie and the flat top. Harold is a giant zombie nerd on the right with the t-shirt and the bad haircut. Remember that now. If you read our last adventure, you may recall the final terrifying scene where Tippy Tinkle-Trousers ended up covering beneath the giant foot of zombie-net Herald. You were probably horrified when the supersized shoe slammed down the ground, leaving behind a squishy red stain. You may even have commented on the surprising inappropriateness of such a murderous and bloody scene appearing in children's book. It's fun to feel offended, isn't it? Unfortunately, I am sorry to have to tell you that there was no murder at the end of the last book. There wasn't even any blood. What happened at the end of our last story is something called misdirection. It's what happens when you are led to believe that something is true, but in reality, it's not true at all. Misdirection happens a lot in real life, especially in politics, history, education, medicine, marketing, science, religion, and on the Oprah Winfrey Show. With all of this misdirection out there, life can get a little confusing. But don't worry, this epic novel contains no misdirection whatsoever. This legendary tome will explain everything, from our recent narrative complicators to the vast mysteries of our universe. By the time you get to page 210, you will know it all. You will be a genius. You will be smarter than the most brilliant scientist who ever walked to Earth. So let's get started, shall we? If you ever been to the zoo, you might have noticed that really big creatures move kind and slowly. Take elephants, for example. They don't move very fast, even when they are in a hurry. Sure, they might cover a lot of ground, but that's only because they're so big. If you were to shrink an elephant down to the size of a house cat, you'd be shocked at how long it takes for them to get from one place to another. They're so darn it slow that it wouldn't be long before somebody changed the story of the tortoise and the hare into more appropriate the miniature elephant and the hare. It's the same thing with Lunacrum zombie nerds. Sure, they are big and scary and stuff, but they move really slowly. So if a zombie nerd ever lifts his foot over you with the intent of stomping you into a puddle, don't worry. You actually have a few minutes before you in a real danger. Tippy found this out the hard way. When zombie nerd Herald lifted his foot above Tidy's head, Tippy screamed in horror. Then Tippy screamed again and again. Then he checked his watch and screamed some more. Finally, Tippy's voice got a little scratchy from all that screaming, so he got up and walked over to one of the few remaining stores on the planet to buy some cherry-throat lozenges. While he was there, he purchased a new suit and bow tie, read part of magazines, and got a foot massage. On his way out of the store, Tippy noticed an extra large novelty ketchup packet that was on sale, so he bought it and dragged it back to the scene of the crime. Zombie nerd Herald's shoes was still coming down slowly as Tippy placed the extra large novelty ketchup packed under it walked away. Tippy climbed back in his roboter trousers, just as the zombie nerd Herald's shoe hit the pavement and crushed the giant novelty ketchup package. A bright red stain squished out from beneath the zombie feet shoes, as Tippy's robot trousers disappeared in a crackling glow of light. You see, Tippy had mistakenly caused some trouble the last time he had gone back in time, so he had to go back again to undo the damage he had done. But before I can tell you that story, I have to give you this warning. Chapter 2. Let's get serious, folks. Did you ever notice how grown-ups hate it when kids are having fun? Seriously. When was the last time you were doing something fun and some adult came over and made you stop? If you're like most kids, you're probably reading this very book because some adult wanted you to quit playing video games or watching TV. If you don't believe me, try this experiment. Grab a few of your friends, go into the corner of a room and start goofing around. Make some noise, start laughing and cheering, and maybe shout out woohoo or two. It's been scientifically proven that 98% of all grown-ups will drop whatever they're doing and rush over to put a stop whatever nonsense you're up to. You have to wonder, why are most grown-ups like this? Weren't they ever kids themselves? Didn't they enjoy laughing and cheering and goofing around when they were young? If so, when did they stop and why? Now, I certainly can't speak for all adults, but I'm going to anyway. I think it's a lot easier for adults to stomp out someone else's fun than it is for them to reflect on their own lives and figure out where it all went so miserable wrong. It's just too depressing for grown-ups to ponder all the decades of comparison, failures, laziness, fear, and regrettable choices that slowly transformed them from running, jumping, laughing, fun-loving kids into grumpy. Complaining, calorie counting, easily offended, peace and cry demanded grooches. In other words, it's hard to look within yourself than it's to shout, "Hey, you kids, cut that out." Keeping this in mind, you might not want to smile or laugh while reading this book. And when you get to the fliporama parts, I suggest you flip with bored, disinterested look on your face, or some adult will probably take this book away from you and make you read Sarah Plain and Tall instead. Don't say I didn't warn you. Tippy returns again, Chapter 3. Tippy Tingle Trousers was in big trouble. He had zapped himself back in time 5 years and accidentally frightened 4 bullies. This toothless mistake set in motion a series of events that ultimately got Mr. Crab fired. And since there was no Mr. Scrub, there was no Captain Underpants. And since there was no Captain Underpants, there was nobody to save the world from the terrible devastation caused by the villains from our first 3 epic novels. Tippy decided there was only one thing to do: go back in the time and stop himself from scarring those bullies. But in order to do this, he would have to go back in time before the last time he had gone back in time. So Tippy set his tinkle time travel meter for 10 minutes before the last time he had arrived in the past and pressed the away we go button. After several seconds of made-for-television style special effects, Tippy found himself transported to the awful night of the terrifying thunderstorm. Everything looked very familiar. He knew at any moment the 4 bullies would come running from the school and tear across the football field. Then they would come face to face with him. Well, a slightly younger version of him, and only he could stop it all from happening. Tippy hid behind the side of the school and waited as the wind howled furiously. Suddenly, a brilliant flash of lightning struck a nearby power line. The electricity in the school went out and all of the windows became dark. Tippy listened closely and heard the sound of squealing and slapping and shuffling. It sounded as if terrible struggle was taking place inside the school. Then, suddenly, the back door of the school crashed open and the 4 terrified bullies showed their way outside. Quickly, they darted toward the football field. This was Tippy's big chance. He aimed his Freezy Beam 4000 at the running delinquents and zapped them all with a mini mountain and molecular modified ice. The 4 bullies were frozen in place. Tippy scanned the boys with his life system monitor and found them to be perfectly preserved. The carbonate and Tibanna gas-infused ice had been programmed to remain solid for 15 minutes, just long enough for Tippy to do this thing. Quickly, Tippy turned toward the football field, where all ball of blue lightning was growing bigger and bigger. Suddenly, it exploded in a blinding flash. And there, where the ball of lightning had been, was a giant pair of robotic trousers. "Boy, that was a close one," said a voice from inside the depths of the nearly arrived robot trousers. "Captain Underpants is a lot stronger than I thought." The zipper of the nervily arrived robotic trousers opened and the tiny man peeked out to marvel at the world of 5 years ago. But to his surprise, he saw an identical copy of himself staring right at him and tapping his giant robotic foot impotently. "Who are you?" asked the nearly arrived Tippy. "I'm you," shouted the future Tippy. "You're from the future." "What's going on?" asked Tippy. "I'm here to stop you from scaring those kids over there," said future Tippy, pointing at frozen bullies. "Why?" said Tippy. "What's so important about those kids?" "I have no idea," said the future Tippy. "All I know is I scared those kids when I came back here last time, and apparently it caused a chain reaction that resulted in the total destruction of Earth, more or less." "I see," said Tippy. "So, what we do now?" Future Tippy looked at his watch. "Those kids are going to thaw out in 8 minutes and 11 seconds, he said. "We've got to be gone by 10. So he reached into the cockpit of his robot trousers and grabbed one of his very fast inventions, the Shrink Pick 2000. Tippy aimed it at the younger version of himself and pressed the button. Bzzz. A powerful beam of energy blasted the newly arrived Tippy Tingle trousers. and his giant pair of robot trousers and shrunk them down to the size of a baseball. Big Tippy reached down and picked up the tiny version of himself. "What did you do that for?" shouted Tiny Tippy. "I can't very well have two of us running around," said Big Tippy. "I've got to keep an eye on you." Big Tippy tucked Tiny Tippy into his jacket pocket and checked his watch again. 4 minutes and 60 seconds, he muttered to himself. He looked over at the 4 bullies encased in the now cracking ice mound. Big Tippy turned to his tingle time travel meter and programmed it for the date in the future. Time was running out. The ice around the bullies was disappearing fast, so Tippy sneaked away to the center of town, pressed his away we go button and disappeared into a ball of blue lightning. 2 seconds later, the ice mountain that had encased and preserved the bullies disk grinding completely, without skipping a beat. The 4 frightened friends continue their mad dash away from school. As they run across a football field towards their home, something about the Kipper and his friends changed forever. They would never again be the same disabled bullies they once were. Chapter 4. Fixing the Future. Big Tippy had set his tinkle time travel meter for a sunny afternoon in October, 4 years in the future. He arrived as usual in a giant ball of blue lightning that grew bigger and bigger until it exploded in blinding flash. "What's going on out there?" cried Tiny Tippy. "I can't see anything." "Shh!" shut Big Tippy, as he shoved Tiny Tippy down into deep, darkened depths of his jacket pocket. Big Tippy listened carefully. He heard the voice of a child muttering, "This can't be good." Tippy unzipped the zipper of his robot trousers and peeked out. To his delight, the world looked like it usually did. No destruction, no giant zombie nerds, no moon rocks. Everything seemed pretty normal. "Hey, it's Professor Poopy Pants," shouted a small boy whom Tippy recognized immediately. Suddenly 2 cubs standing nearby started to laugh, which angered Tippy. "Stop laughing," shouted Tippy. "My name is no longer Professor Poopy Pants. I changed it to Tippy Tinkle Trousers." The 2 cops laughed even harder. "And if I got special surprise for anybody who thinks my new name is funny," said the furious professor. Tippy pressed the button and his frozen beam 4000 causing it to rise from the depths of the robot trousers. He set the freezing ray for 20 minutes and zapped the cops, transforming them into frozen statues. "My freezy beam 4000 will take care of anybody who stands in my way," said Tippy. "And now," he said with a wicked smile, "it's time for my revenge." "Oh no," screamed George. "Here we go again," screamed Herald. Tippy chased George and Herald and their 2 pets Zulu and Cracker through town, zapping his freezy beam 4000 and them and laughing maniacally. The chase lasted all afternoon and into the night. The 4 friends hid behind buildings, inside rubbish bins, under bridges and even down in the sewer. But it didn't matter where they sought refuge because Tippy Tinkle Trousers always found them. By the morning of the next day, our heroes had found a hidden place behind some bushes near the park. "What are we going to do?" whispered George. "There's nowhere else to hide." "I don't know," whispered Herald. George and Herald looked at their 2 pets, shivering with them in the morning mist. "We are not going to make it," whispered George. "But there's no reason that Zulu and Cracker should have to suffer." Herald's eyes began to water. "You are right," he whispered. George and Herald patted their 2 friends sadly as they devised a plan that returned to dinosaur age. "We could use the purple potty to take Crackers back home where we found him," said George. "Yeah," said Herald. "And Zulu could stay with him. They both be safe there." As soon as it was clear, the four friends sneaked away from the bushes and headed for Jeremy Horvitz Elementary School, carefully avoiding major streets and crossings. It was almost noon by the time George and Herald and their two pets reached the school. Cautiously, they sneaked through the front door and dashed up the stairs to the library. "Hey, boobs," shouted Mr. Crab angrily. "Where have you kids been?" George and Herald looked down and saw Mr. Crab carrying a large cardboard box. "Well," Mr. Crab shouted, "get down here and explain yourself." George and Herald looked at their two pets and continued running up the stairs. Mr. Crab was furious. His day hadn't started out very well. For some strange reason, all the red curtain in his office had been disappearing, and he wasn't happy about it. So Mr. Crab had driven angrily to stop, bought a replacement box of curtains, started a big fight with the cashier, got a flat tire on the way home, and now his truant students were bringing animals into school, ignoring his commands and running up the stairs. "You kids get back here," shouted Mr. Crab, as he chased after the four frightened friends. George and Herald, Cactus and Zulu raced to the top of the stairs, dashed into the library, and locked the door behind them. There they beheld their old troublesome nemesis, the purple potty. It was a homemade time machine that had a few quickers to say the last, and our heroes approached it curiously. "Do you still remember how to use the thing?" asked Herald. "Of course," said George. "We just used it yesterday morning. All I have to do is to set the controller for 65 million years ago, then pull down on the chain. Easy squeezy, mac and cheesy." Suddenly, Mr. Crab reached the library door and struggled with the locked doorknob. The boys heard a shuffling sound, followed by the jingle of the keys. "Let's boogie," cried George. The four climbed into the purple potty and George closed the door. At the very moment Mr. Crab came crashing through the library door with his box of red curtains, he ran the purple potty and banged on the door. "I know you're in there," he screamed. "You can't hide from me forever." "Hurry," cried Herald as George fiddled the control. "We've got to get out of here." "I'm working as fast as I can," cried George. Suddenly, a giant dark shadow filled the library. Mr. Crab turned to see a huge robot pair of trousers at the window. The zipper unzipped and Tippy Tingle trousers peeked through the canvas opening. "I've got you now," he shouted. Tippy reached for the button on his Freezy Beam 4000 as Mr. Scrub covered in terror. At the very moment, George finished setting the controller for 65 million years ago. Then he pulled it down on the chain. All at once, there was a brilliant flash of green light, and the purple potty, along with Mr. Crab and his card box, disappeared into a whirlwind of electrified ozone. Chapter 5. Tiny Tippy's Tremendous Task. "Rats," screamed Tippy as he watched the purple potty disappear. "Those kids have a time machine, and I don't know where they went." "What's going on?" cried Tiny Tippy from the depths of the big Tippy pocket. "I can't see a thing." "Those kids took off in time machine," Big Tippy barked at the miniature version of himself. "And they took Captain Underpants with them." "Where did they go?" asked Tiny Tippy. "How should I know?" Big Tippy yelled. "Hey, I've got an idea," said Tiny Tippy. "Why don't I go back in time and find out?" "Good idea," said Big Tippy. He reached down and placed Tiny Tippy in the library. "You go back in time 10 minutes and listen to everything they say. Then, when I show up, tell me more where they went." "You got it," said Tiny Tippy. He set his tinkle time travel meter for 10 minutes ago, and in a blue crackling instant he was gone. Tiny Tippy arrived in the same spot he had left, only it was now 10 minutes earlier. He heard some people running up the stairs, so he decided to hide behind a rubbish bin. Suddenly George, Herald and their 2 pets dashed into the room and locked the door behind them. Tiny Tippy watched as the boys tiptoed towards the tall time-traveling toilet. "Do you still remember how to use this thing?" asked Herald. "Of course," said George. "We just used it yesterday morning. All I have to do is set the controller for 65 million years ago. Then pull down on the chain. Easy squeezy mac and cheesy." "Ah," muttered Tiny Tippy. "They are going back in time." Tiny Tippy watched as the 4 friends climbed into the time machine and closed the door. He saw Mr. Crab crash through the library door and bang on the lavender lavatory. Then he saw himself, the big version of himself that is, appear at the window. "I've got you now," shouted Big Tippy. Suddenly there was a brilliant flash of green light, and the purple potty along with Mr. Crab and his cardboard box disappeared into a whirlwind of electrified sound. "Rats!" screamed Tippy as he watched the purple potty disappear. "Those kids have a time machine and I don't know where they went." "I do," said Tiny Tippy as he stepped out from behind the rubbish bin. "Who are you?" asked Big Tippy. "I'm Tiny Tippy," said Tiny Tippy. "That's impossible," said Big Tippy. "Tiny Tippy's right here." He reached into his pocket and pulled out the miniature version of himself, who had been complaining because he couldn't see a thing. "I'm 10 minutes older than that guy," said Tiny Tippy. "You sent me back in time so I could find out where these kids went to." "Oh, I get it," said Big Tippy. "Good idea. So, where'd they go?" "They went backwards in time to 65 million years ago," said Tiny Tippy. "Ah," said Big Tippy and slightly younger Tiny Tippy to themselves simultaneously. "They're going back in time." Big Tippy picked up Tiny Tippy and shoved him into his pocket, not slightly younger Tiny Tippy. "Let's all go back to the dinosaur age, shall we? If the time is right, we get there just before the purple potty arrives." Chapter 6. 65 million years ago. The primitive midday sky lit up with several blinding flashes as the purple potty suddenly appeared in the top of an ancient tree. George and Herald had successfully brought Crackers back to where they had found him. But when they opened the door of the purple potty, they discovered they also brought a stowaway. "What the heck is going on here?" cried Mr. Crab as he hung from a branch high up on the treetop. "Oh no," cried George. "Mr. Crab must have been standing too close to the purple potty when we zapped backwards in time. He got zapped back with us." Herald reached out his hand to grab hold of Mr. Crab. "How could things get any worse?" he asked. Suddenly, the tree started to shake. And boom went the tree. George and Herald looked down and saw Tippy's giant robot trousers kicking the side of the tree. "What's he doing here?" cried Herald. "I don't know," said George, "but I think we are about to fall." The horrible kicking continued and the tree shook wildly. Finally, the purple potty slid sideways and toppled over. "We're doomed," screamed Herald as they fell. The purple potty cracked and split apart as it tumbled down the side of the tree. Mr. Crab fell too, smacking against every branch on the way down. Suddenly, the purple potty hit the ground with a terrible crash and broke apart into 1,000 pieces. Mr. Crab hit the ground, too, but was surprised to find out that wasn't hurt a bit. Big Tippy kicked through the wreck of the purple potty, but could not find any trace of George or Herald or the pets. "Where did they go?" he asked. "Look up there," cried the 2 tiny tips, who were beaking off the Big Tippy's pocket. Crackers had grabbed George and Herald and Zulu at the last second. "Good boy, Crackers," said George. "You saved us." "Not for long," screamed Big Tippy as he parried partially from a porthole on top of his robot trousers. George and Herald looked down at Mr. Crab, who was still trying to figure out how he had fallen 20 meters and not got hurt. The two boys snapped their fingers, and suddenly a welcome smile spread across Mr. Crab's face. Immediately he pulled off his shoes and socks. Then he unclipped his tie and ripped off his shirt. He grabbed a red curtain from the counter box beside him and tied it around his neck as he wiggled out of his trousers. Captain Underpants was back, and Tippy Tingle Trousers and his two tiny twins were in for the fight of their lives. Chapter 7. Two Tiny Traitors. George and Herald run through the thick jungle foliage with crackers and Zulu flying above them. Captain Underpants decided to tag along to choose for fun. Big Tippy jumped on the back of nearby Dinosaurs Rex and chased after them. "You can't run forever," shouted Big Tippy. "When I catch you guys, I'm gonna tear you apart." "Can we help?" asked the two tiny Tippies, who were tucked away in Big Tippy's jacket pocket. "No," yelled Big Tippy sternly. "You two keep quiet while I take care of business. This is a job for men, not for two little twerps like you." As the chase continued, the two tiny Tippies grumbled to themselves. "Boy, I'm getting tired of the giant jerk bossing us around." "Me too," said slightly younger tiny Tippy. "He thinks he's such a big shoot just because he's huge." "I sure wish I still had my goosey grow 4000, said tiny Tippy. "Then I could make myself big again." "I was just thinking the same thing," said slightly younger tiny Tippy. "But unfortunately, we stored the goosey grow 4000 in the top half of our robo-suit, and Captain Underpants destroyed it back in Chapter 8 of our last epic novel. "Hey," cried tiny Tippy, "why don't we go backer? I mean forward in time to Chapter 8 of our last epic novel. We could grab the goosey grow 4000 and make ourselves gigantic." "I like the way you think," said slightly younger tiny Tippy. So while Big Tippy chased everybody through the treacherous jungles of the Creatures period, the two tiny Tippies set their tingle time travel meter for the night of the big battle from Chapter 8 or of our last epic novel. Big Tippy was so engrossed in his poor sight of heroes, he didn't even notice the teensy-wincy blue sparks of flashing light emanating from his pockets as his two dashes popped doppelgangers disappeared in whiff of primeval troposphere. Chapter 8. Mission Improbable. Instantly, the two tiny Tippies zapped forward in time, only to find themselves knee-deep in something creamy, coconutty, and marshmallowy. "Honey," said a mother who was sitting in a dinner table, "two little pairs of trousers are walking around in our Ambrose salad." "Oh, really?" said her son. And I'm the one seeing a therapist." Tiny Tippy and slightly younger tiny Tippy crawled out of the serving bowl and shook off the pineapple chunk and mandarin orange slices that had stuck to the legs. Then they jumped to the floor and slipped through the letterbox in the front door. Outside, they could hear the crashing sounds of the terrifying battle between Captain Underpants and Big Tippy. The two tiny Tippies ran towards the noises until they arrived at the school football field. Captain Underpants had just started pulling on Tippy's robo-arms. One by one, the rivets in the robo-suit's thick steel belt began to pop. Captain Underpants janked and tuggled and pulled, and finally the robot suit tore in half with a terrible clank. Tiny Tippy and slightly younger tiny Tippy ran over to the place where Captain Underpants had dropped the upper portion of the robo-suit. Quickly, they searched through the twisted metal until they found what they were looking for, the goosey grow 4000. Outside, they could hear the crackling sound of Big Tippy zapping himself backwards in time. A blinding flash lit up the nighttime sky as the two Tippies dragged the Goosey Grove 4000 from the wreckage and carried it away with them through the car. Soon, they came to a dark street behind some old warhorses. "Okay," said Tiny Tippy. "You zap me, then I'll zap you." "Hey," said slightly younger Tiny Tippy. "How come you get first?" "Because I'm slightly older than you," said Tiny Tippy, "and slightly more mature." All right, said slightly younger Tiny Tippy, who could not argue with the fact that Tiny Tippy was indeed 10 minutes more mature than himself. "Let's just do this thing and get it over with." He aimed the Goosey Grove 4000 at Tiny Tippy and jumped on the button. And before you could even say "Gzzz," a beam of energy zapped Tiny Tippy, causing him to grow 10 meters tall. "Zap me again," said Tiny Tippy. "All right," sighed slightly younger Tiny Tippy. "But then you zap me, right?" "Sure," said Tiny Tippy. "I promise." Gzzz went another bright beam of energy. This time, Tiny Tippy grew to be 20 meters tall. "Ha ha," he laughed. "Behold, I have been reborn as Super Mega Tippy." My turn, kind slightly younger Tiny Tippy." Super Mega Tippy reached down and grabbed the Goosey Grove 4000. He tucked it into the cup holder on his electrical panel and waved goodbye to slightly younger Tippy. "Hey," cried slightly younger Tiny Tippy. "What about me?" "Sorry," said Super Mega Tippy, "but this is job for a man, not a little twerp like you." Chapter 9. Meanwhile, 7 pages ago. 65 million years earlier, Big Tippy had chased our heroes to the jagged edge of cliff overlooking a lake. Crackers grabbed George and Herald by their shirt collars, and they all sailed safely over the edge of the cliff to join Captain Underpants in the clouds. Big Tippy's Tyrannosaurus Rex screeched to a halt at the cliff's edge and roared furiously at the 5 floating friends. "We won," Captain Underpants laughed at Tippy. "Now it's our turn to chase you." "This isn't a game," yelled Big Tippy. "This is serious." He leaped off the neck of T-Rex and grabbed to Captain Underpants with his patient robot extend gripper. Together, they fell 300 meters into the lake. When they emerged from the depths of the lake, something had changed. Tippy was still just as mean and ornery as ever, but Captain Underpants looked different. "What the heck is going on here?" yelled angry-looking hero. "Oh no," cried George. "Captain Underpants got water on his head. He changed back into Mr. Crab." "Quick, Crackers," called Herald. "Fly us down there as fast as you can." Crackers glided down towards the tempest struggle below, and the boys snapped their fingers with all their might. But it did not good. Mr. Crab's head was still soaking wet, so he could not change back into Captain Underpants. "Well, look what I just figured out," cried Mr. Big Tippy. "Captain Underpants turns back into a crappy old elementary school principal when he gets wet." "You leave him alone," yelled George, still snapping his fingers in vain. "Yeah," cried Herald. "It's not a fair fight anymore." "Wow," laughing Big Tippy increasingly. "He's gotta be the world's easiest superhero to defeat. It could destroy him with a water pistol." Suddenly a blink flash light up the world around them. Then came the footsteps, terrible, deafening, tumultuous footsteps that shook the earth with each thundering storm. Finally, a massive shadow spread across the lake. Big Tippy looked up. It was Super Mega Tippy. "Hey!" shouted Big Tippy. He quickly checked his jacket pocket and found it to be empty. "Where do you come from? How do you get so big? Where's the other one?" None of that is important now, said Super Mega Tippy. What's important now is who's in charge. Hey, you never believe this, said Big Tippy, ignoring his disabled double. I just figured out that if you get Captain Underpants wet, he loses his superpowers. His weakness is water, said Super Mega Tippy. Wow, really? I know, said Big Tippy. I couldn't believe it myself. Hey, I'm gonna destroy him real quick. Then we can get out of here and go rule the world and stuff. You are not going to destroy him, said Super Mega Tippy. I am. Now hold on, said Big Tippy. I caught him, so I'm gonna destroy him. Oh yeah, said Super Mega Tippy, with a growl that made the surface of the lake tremble. Well, I'm bigger than you, so I'm gonna decide who destroys who. He took a giant step towards Big Tippy and reached down with an extendo gripper. Not so fast, cried Big Tippy. He pressed a button on his control panel, causing the back of his robo-trousers to lower. Suddenly, a gigantic metal arm emerged from the depths of Tippy's giant robo-rear, revealing a fortunately thermonuclear bomb. You take one step closer and I blow us all to smithereens, said Big Tippy. You're forgetting something, yelled Super Mega Tippy. I have a bomb too, and it's a lot bigger than yours. Super Mega Tippy took a step closer as Big Tippy pressed the button. Suddenly, a light on the side of the bomb began to flash red. A computerized voice emanating from the bomb's arming system began to count down. This bomb will detonate in 60 seconds, the voice said. You pressed the button, screamed Super Mega Tippy angrily. I can't believe you actually pressed the button. I don't care, cried Big Tippy. I've been working on my revenge for years. I'm not going to let you rob me of this moment. I don't care if it kills me too. This bomb will detonate in 45 seconds, said the bomb. We can turn this bomb off, you know, said Super Mega Tippy. Once the countdown starts, it's over. I told you, I don't care, said Big Tippy. I just want to be the one who finally destroy Captain Underpants. Super Mega Tippy reached down with an uncurling extend mega grippy and cut Mr. Crab free. Hey, screamed Big Tippy, what are you doing? He's mine, said Super Mega Tippy as he drew back his foot. But what about me, said Big Tippy. What about my bomb? Your bomb, your problem, said Super Mega Tippy as he kicked Big Tippy with all his might. Chapter 10. What really killed the dinosaurs? No, screamed Big Tippy as he sailed into the clouds at incredible speed. The bomb will detonate in 30 seconds, said the bomb. Big Tippy flew across North America, soaring faster and faster through the stars' roar. This bomb will detonate in 15 seconds, said the bomb. Big Tippy began to lose altitude as he sailed towards the Gulf of Mexico. The bomb will detonate in 5 seconds, said the bomb. 4, 3, 2, 1. Finally, Big Tippy landed just off the coast with a violently colossal splashdown, as seen below. The massive explosion that followed blew a chunk in the earth 15 miles deep and more than 100 kilometers wide. Terrible earthquakes shook the entire planet as a giant tsunami sent a towering wall of seawater rolling across the mountains. What's happening? Cried George. It's the damned nuclear bomb, shouted Super Mega Tippy. It just triggered the start of the era. I'm gonna become extinct if I don't get out of here. Quickly, Super Mega Tippy set his tingle time travel meter for 60,000 years into the future and pressed the away we go button. Suddenly, Giant bolts of lightning began shooting out of Super Mega Tippy's robo-trousers as a ball of blue light enveloped him. "Quick, crackers," cried Herald as thick volcanic ash began blocking out the sun. "Fly into the blue light. It's our only chance to escape." Crackers pointed his long reptilian necks toward the crackling orb, and the four friends sailed downwards into the blinding blue lightning. Chapter 11. 2,000 years ago. A flash of white light filled the mid-afternoon haze of the Pleistocene epoch. The crystal blue lake that had once been there was now gone. In its place were vast savanna plains stretching out the thick forest hillside and rocky caves. All was quiet except for the sounds of insects and birds, and a faint rhythmic drumming from far in the forest. "Where are we?" asked George. "I think the better question would be, when are we?" said Herald. Super Mega Tippy was surprised to see George and Herald and Crackers and Zulu. Well, he said, "it looks like we have 4 stowaways." But what Super Mega Tippy did not realize is that he had 5 stowaways as well. It was slightly younger Tiny Tippy who had that very moment was carefully crawling down a button on Super Mega Tippy's shirt. "That stupid Mega Tippy thinks he can lie to me and get away with it," said slightly younger Tiny Tippy as he jumped onto the control panel. "But I will teach him a lesson he will never forget." Slightly younger Tiny Tippy pried up aluminium vent and slipped effortlessly into the wire inwards of the control panel. First, he reversed the polarity on the emulsing inhibitor. Then, he switched the blue and the green wires on the reverse. Finally, he snipped all the wires of the Freezy Beam 4000 off button. "Ha ha ha," laughed slightly younger Tiny Tippy. "The next time that big jerk uses his Freezy, he's going to get a big surprise." Meanwhile, the drama outside was getting serious. Super Mega Tippy swatted out our heroes as they soared bravely through the ionic sky. Cracker skillfully swapped and dove and looped as the extant flex mechanic grip whizzed after him. But Super Mega Tippy quickly became impatient and unleashed 2 more extended flex machine grippers. Poor Crackers could not them all, and the 4 friends were soon captured. "I've got you now," screamed Super Mega Tippy. "Hey, look," said George, pointing at the ground behind Super Mega Tippy. "There's a bunch of cavemen down there watching us." "I'm not falling for that trick," said Super Mega Tippy. "As soon as I turn around, you guys are going to try to escape." "No, seriously," cried Herald. "We are not lying. Look behind you." Super Mega Tippy glanced quickly and noticed that the boys were indeed telling the truth. Standing behind them at the edge of the forest were about a dozen very surprised-looking cavemen staring up in dumbfounded bewilderment. "You boys shouldn't be surprised to see cavemen," said Super Mega Tippy as he studied the strange prehistoric people. "We're in the middle of the Pleistocene epoch. This is around the time that the first human families started to appear on Earth. I bet you dumb kids didn't know that, did you?" Super Mega Tippy turned to smile half-heartedly at George and Herald, but of course they were gone. Zulu had bitten through there of the extant grippers, and the 4 friends had fluttered away. "No!" screamed Super Mega Tippy as he stomped his giant feet in frustration. The starlit cavemen screamed and ran in terror back to their homes in the depth of the forest. Super Mega Tippy grabbed some strong vines and tied Mr. Crab to a boulder underneath a waterfall. There, he sneered. "This should keep you moist and powerless until I get back." Then he stormed into the forest, searching for George and Herald and their pets. Chapter 12. calling all cavemen. How are we going to get out of this mess? Asked Herald. I don't know, said George, but we are going to need tippy-tingle trousers if we ever want to get back home. Are you kidding? Said Herald. We can't trust that guy. He can't even trust himself. I know, said George, but Tippy has a time machine and we don't, so we're going to have to defeat him. But we need any army to defeat that guy, said Herald. So let's go get an army, said George. The four friends glided above the grassy plains as they followed the sound of beating drums. Soon they arrived at the forest. The drumming was getting louder. Crackers swooped down and landed behind some bushes near the cave. Just beyond them was the Cavepool village. George and Herald, Crackers, and Zulu peeked over the thick bushes as they watched the cavemen and cavewomen go about their daily routines. They seemed so peaceful, so George decided to speak up. Hello, said George. We come in peace. We are friends. The cave people looked confused and startled. They did not seem to understand. Maybe they don't speak English, said Herald. Aloha, said George, who only speak one other language. Iwai omeko inwai escape. Iwai aware idens frey? That didn't work either. The cave people grunted and sniffed at George and Herald, their pets, but they said nothing. Suddenly, off in the distance, the sound of a giant footstep came thundering through the depth of forest. Tippy was coming, and he was getting closer and closer, with each terrifying stump. I know, you are in that village, Tippy screamed, but you can't hide from me. Tippy crashed through the trees and stumped into the village, kicking over huts and smushing everything in sight. The terrified Cavemen grabbed their children and ran for the safety of the caves behind their village. George and Herald and Crackers and Zulu run into the caves also and hide with the cave people in the darkness as the destruction outside continued. After a while, some cave teenagers started a campfire. Their flickering light illuminated the massive walls of the cave as the cave people whimpered and huddled together in horror. Wow, said George, some army they turned out to be. It's not their fault, said Herald. They've never seen giant robo-trousers before. They're just scared. If we couldn't only communicate with them, said George. There's got to be some way to reach them. Herald looked up to the giant black walls of the cave. How about pictures, he asked. Hey, good idea, said George. Herald walked over to the campfire and grabbed the charred, smoking stick from the burning cinders. Then he went to one side of the giant cave and started to create the world's first cave drawing. At the first, cave people were astonished. They had never seen anybody draw before. They laughed and pointed and jumped up and down every time Herald drew something new. But when Herald drew trippy and hot robot pants, the cave people became frightened. They grunted nervously and lowered their heads in fear and submission. Whoa, said Herald. How are we ever going to change their minds about Tippy? I know, said George. Let's make a wordless comic. They understand the good idea, said Herald. Let's do it. So George and Herald found a ladder and began creating the world's very first comic. The cave people watched with excitement as George and Herald's tale unfolded. Soon their opinion about Tippy and his robot trousers began to evolve. Chapter 13. The World's Oldest Comic. This was a comic without words, so if you asked yourself why I don't speak that long, look and see it yourself, what was going on there. Chapter 14. Clash of the Cavemen. Once the cave people read George and Herald's cave comic, they stopped being afraid of Tippy on his robo-trousers. Now they were inspired. Quickly, they divided themselves into groups and began planning their counterattacks. George and Herald watched as the cave people grabbed their own charred sticks from the fire and began drawing out elaborate plans. Even though they could only speak in grunts and groans, they all understood comics and they all know what needed to be done. Before long, everyone high-fived and sneaked out of the back of the cave. The cave people ran up the hillside, trying vines between trees, placing banana peels all over the ground, and setting booby traps everywhere they could think of. Once everyone was ready, George and Herald and Zulu hopped on the cracker's back, and they flew around the cave where Tippy was still busy trying to visit the village. "Oh," Tippy called George, "where have you been? You're going to miss all the fun." Tippy returned quickly and chased after the four friends who led him directly into the cave people's traps. As Tippy ran, he glanced down and noticed a vine tied tightly between two tree trunks. Quickly, he scratched to halt. "Ha-ha," Tippy bellowed. "Did you think I was going to fall for that lame trick?" Tippy rolled his eyes in contempt as he jumped over the vine and landed a bunch of banana peels. "Yay!" Tippy screamed as he slipped and crashed to the ground. Then Tippy started sliding on the banana peels down the step hill towards the cliff below. "No!" Tippy wailed as he slid faster and faster. Finally, Tippy flipped over the edge of the cliff and tumbled into the pit below with a mighty splosh. Tippy was furious. He pulled himself up out of the sticky black tar and screamed, "Is that all you got?" But the cave people had a few more surprises in store. "You stupid cave jerks," Tippy screamed as he finally came to his senses. "Is that all you got?" But unfortunately for Tippy, there was still more to come. "Ah!" screamed Tippy as his tar-covered caught on fire. Tippy ran shrieking towards a small pond as the flames spread everywhere. Finally, the screaming robot fireball plunged deep into the cooling waters of the pond with a guardian splash. George, Herald, Cracker, Zulu, and the cave people gathered around the edge of the pond to see what had become of the evil nemesis. For a few minutes, everything was calm. Then the surface of the water began to tremble. Suddenly, Tippy's bruised, battered, and worn Robbie body rose from the bubbling depths of the pond. "Is that all you got?" Tippy demanded as he lunged toward the cave people and chased after them. But unfortunately for Tippy, they still had much more unpleasantness in store for him. Chapter 15. The Incredible Graphic Violence Chapter, Part 1, in Flip-O-Rama. As any historian will tell you, flip-o-ramas were first created nearly 2,000 years ago on stone tables. These cheesy animations were lots of fun to flip, but they were so heavy they often resulted in smashed thumbs and broken fingers. Ancient Egyptians, desperate to solve this problem, invented papyrus. Around 350 because so that flip-o-ramas could be flipped safely by everybody. So please enjoy this ancient tradition now improved and exchanged by the modern-day miracle of paper. Boulder Bash. Rhinoplasty. Timber trauma. Chapter 16. What really caused the Ice Age? Is that all you got? Moaned Tippy as he fell to his battered, smoldering knees. Tippy's giant robotic trousers might have been a technological marvel, but they were no match for caveman cleverness. Tippy was in trouble, but he still had one last trick up his sleeve. He reached down to his control panel and pressed the Freezy Beam 4000. Suddenly, the battery top of the robot trousers opened up, and the Freezy Beam 4000 rose mini-click from the robot innards. Instantly, a massive burst of ice blasted at the cave people. Fortunately, they all got out of the way just in time, but the ice kept blasting. "What's wrong with this thing?" said Tippy as he pressed the Freezy Beam 4000 off button. The button was stuck, so Tippy pulled the emergency shut-off lever. That wouldn't budge either. "It's almost as if someone has just tampered with my control panel," said Tippy, unaware that tiptoeing across the floor at that very moment was someone who had just tampered with his control panel. Slightly younger, tiny Tippy, still angry that he had been betrayed by his treacherous twin, had rigged the Freeze Beam 4000 so it could never be turned off. Now the ice beam was going berserk. Glaciers of synthetic ice programmed to last for 70,000 years cascaded from Tippy's Freeze Beam 4000, encasing the trees and securing his robot feet to the frozen ground. Things were getting out of control. Tippy quickly crawled under his command center, desperately trying to figure out a way to turn off the spewing icebergs. This was slightly younger tiny Tippy's change. He reached out with his robo-gloves and grabbed the Goose Grow 4000. Then, with a mighty leap, he jumped to the opening at the top of the robotic legs and hopped down to the frosty ground. The ice was spreading at a dangerous rate. Slightly younger tiny Tippy needed to act fast. With no time to spare, he grabbed a piece of bubblegum from his pocket, chewed it up, read the comic on the wrapper, then jammed the sticky bubblegum into the button of the Goosey Grow 4000. "Now," said slightly younger tiny Tippy when he had pressed the button down, "it stick," which is exactly what happened. Zzz. A continuous beam of growth energy burst forth from the goosey-shaped contributions. Quickly, slightly younger tiny Tippy jumped into the energy beam and grew to an impressive 10 meters tall. "Awesome!" cried slightly younger tiny Tippy as he jumped in front of the beam again and again, like a child leaping through a lawn sprinkler. Each time he hit the beam of energy, he grew another 10 meters. "I'm huge!" cried slightly younger tiny Tippy, who was now towering above the earth at an impressive 40 meters. He reached down to pick up the Goosey Grow 4000 with his rope glove. "Just a few more zaps and I'll be—" "Whoops!" cried slightly younger tiny Tippy, as the Goosey Grow 4000 slipped out of his robo-glove and tumbled down on the thick ice below him. Unfortunately, the continuously zapping beam of energy was now pointed directly at the giant mountain of ice, which caused it to grow and expand and spread out even further. Quickly, the ice began pushing its way east across the Ohio Valley and west into the part of the earth that would one day be known as Indiana. Then it began shoving its way north in Michigan and Canada and beyond. An accidental glacier period was developing rapidly, and slightly younger tiny tippy toe needed to get out of there fast if he wanted to avoid it. Chapter 17. George and Herald grabbed their pets and ran as fast as they could to escape the rapidly spreading ice fields. Their caveman friends were right behind them. "Quick, Cracker," said George. "You got to take Zulu and get out of here. It's your only hope." But something was wrong with Crackers. The usual Pilkey seemed to be getting sick. "Maybe he's catching a cold," cried Herald. "He's not used to the freezing temperatures." Soon they came upon the massive waterfall where Mr. Crab was tied up. The ice was already beginning to turn the flowing water into frozen slush. "We've got to rescue Mr. Crab," said George. "But there's no time," said Herald. "We all get frozen." "We don't have a choice," said George. "We can't just leave him there." George and Herald ran towards Mr. Crab and began pulling at the vines holding him in place. When the cave people saw what the boys were trying to do, they also stopped running and came forward to help. But it was too late. The ice got closer and closer as everyone pulled desperately at the vines of rapidly freezing water. The freezing slushy water wrapped around Harold's shirt as thick ice encased George's body. "Oh well," said Herald as he shivered in the rapidly expanded permafrost. "At least we tried our best." "Goodbye," said George as the ice flowed up around his face and covered the top of his head. The end had finally come for George and Herald. It was all over. The only hope they had left was that maybe someday in the future an archaeologist would dig up their fossils, bones, and have a lot of explanation to do. But even that hope seemed far-fetched at best. Chapter 18. Crash. Suddenly the ice around George and Herald and their cave people friends shattered with a mighty carrot chop. "You didn't think I'd leave you behind, did you?" said slightly younger Tiny Tippy as he scooped everyone up with a giant shovel. Everyone held on the other for warmth as slightly younger Tiny Tippy threw south across the frosty glaciers. It was about this time that George and Herald realized that Mr. Scrub's face was no longer wet. It had been freeze-dried along with everything else around them. So they snapped their fingers, and suddenly Miraculous Hero returned. "Gee, it's a bit nippy today," said Captain Underpants. "Forget about that now," said George, shivering. Quickly he had Herald fill Captain Underpants in on the severity of the situation, and before long they all had plans. Captain Underpants flew out of slightly younger Tiny Tippy's robo-glove and grabbed his massive belt buckle. With one sensation swoosh, Captain Underpants ripped tight trousers belt and all right of all robo-legs. "Hey, no fair," screamed slightly younger Tiny Tippy, as he stood shivering in his giant robot boxer shorts. Captain Underpants quickly tied the trippy trousers legs in a knot and told everybody to climb aboard. Soon, all of the good guys were tucked securely in their polyester cotton blend trousers and were flying someplace safe and warm. They zipped across a vast ocean and finally came to a place that was not covered with ice. Captain Underpants swooped down and landed near the Chough Pond in South France. George and Herald said goodbye to their cave people friends. "We sure hope you like your new home here," said George. "Keep drawing," said Herald, "and take care of our paws, Crackers and Zulu, okay?" "Wait a minute," said George. "We can leave our pets here. Crackers is sick. He needs to see a doctor." "Oh yeah," said Herald. I almost forgot. We got to get the future somehow. Quickly, Captain Underpants flew George and Herald and Crackers and Zulu back to the frozen glacier of North America. If they were ever going to get back to the modern time, slightly younger Tiny Tippy was their best bet. The Woo. Chapter 19. When our 5 heroes finally reached slightly younger Tiny Tippy, he didn't seem at all surprised to see them. I'm not all surprised to see you, said slightly younger Tiny Tippy as he sipped casually from his water bottle. I bet you guys want a ride back to the future, don't you? We sure do, said Captain Underpants. That would be so well. Slightly younger Tiny Tippy pointed his water bottle at Captain Underpants' face and squeezed. Splash. What the heck is going on here, said Mr. Crab, as our 5 heroes began falling to the frozen ground. Ah, screamed Herald, we're doomed. Fortunately, slightly younger Tiny Tippy caught them before they hit the ground. But unfortunately, he had something even worse in mind for them than a 40-meter drop to the death. A slightly younger Tiny Tippy set his tinkle time travel meter for a date in the upcoming future. George and Herald bemoaned their continually searching predicament. Well, here we go again, said George. Back in the same mess we always end up in. I know, said Herald. It seems like every time we crack a joke or make a comic book, something terrible happens. You know, said George, if we ever get out of his mess, I think we should stop goofing around all the time. Yeah, I agree, said Herald. We need to quit making comic books and start paying more attention to our schoolwork. And as blue crackling light began to envelop them, George and Herald made a vow to change their ways. They pledged to give up pranks and jokes and comic books, and they promised to begin taking life seriously and to start acting like responsible grown-ups. Wow, said George as they all disappeared into a crackling whirlpool of liquid time. I feel more mature already. Me too, said Herald. Chapter 20. 30 years from now. Suddenly a giant ball of blue lightning exploded in the southern end of busy Western City. George and Herald looked around them and saw the familiar sights of cars and houses and fast food restaurants. We are home, cried George. It sure seems that way, said Herald. But how come everything looks so old? Because we are not back where we started, laughed slightly younger Tiny Tippy. We are 30 years in the future. Why did we come to the future? Asked George. Because, said Tippy, the last time I got rid of Captain Underpants, the whole world was destroyed. I just wanted to make sure that the world could survive the next 30 years without him, and it looks like it can. Tippy marched over to the elementary school and placed George and Herald and their 2 pets on the ground. Get comfortable, boys, said Tippy. I'm about to destroy Captain Underpants once for all, and I want you kids to have the best seats in the house. George and Herald looked up in horror as slightly younger Tiny Tippy began knocking Mr. Crab around like a beanbag. I can't watch, said Herald, as he petted his predator, who only seemed to be getting sicker. Zulu scrambled around the playground, finding twigs and branches and leaves and weaving them into a nest to help keep Crackers warm. Remember, said George, if we get out of this mess, we are going to straighten up and start acting like grown-ups. That's right, said Herald, as he placed Cracker into the warm nest that Zulu had made. We are going to be responsible and mature from now on. As Tippy kicked Mr. Crab around like a football, George and Herald got distracted by a loud communication behind them. 2 teachers were yelling at the students on the playground, instructing them all to stop paying attention to the fire struggle raging above them, and demanding that they straighten up and start acting like grown-ups. As the battle intensified, the obnoxious teacher screamed louder and louder, hurling the threats and insults the curious students. Boy, I sure wish those 2 teachers would chill out, said George. I know, said Herald. They are yelling so loud I can't even hear the fight. Suddenly, a rusty green Honda Civic pulled into the car park, and a familiar-looking character came storming out. It was Mr. Krupp, only that was 30 years older version of him. He was wrinklier than George and Herald were used to, with his coffee-with beard and mustache and trousers pulled up his armpits. Mr. Krupp marched toward the playground, opened his mouth and screamed 4 words that shivers down George and Herald's spines. Mr. Beard, Mr. Hutchins. George and Herald froze. Oh no, whispered Herald. Old Mr. Krabs recognized us. What are we going to do? Asked George. How are we ever going to get out of this mess? Old Mr. Krupp marched towards George and Herald. Getting closer and closer, they shivered in horror. Then Old Man Krupp walked past George and Herald and continued walking towards the playground. Mr. Beard, Mr. Hutchins, he screamed again. Get those kids inside right now. Who is he talking to? Asked George. I have no idea, said Herald. Finally, the 2 screaming teachers turned around. Chapter 21. George Herald's worst nightmare. Do you know that feeling you get when your stomach sinks? It usually occurs just after the realization that something bad has happened or going to happen. People often feel this way when they discover they forgot for the study for a big test, or they're going to miss the school bus, or the giant gulp of milk they just swallowed expired 3 weeks ago. Now imagine that feeling magnified about 1 million times. This is the feeling that occurred in George and Harold's stomach when the 2 obnoxious screaming teachers turned around. It was them. More preciously, it was future versions of themselves. George and Herald had grown up to be teachers, but they weren't the nice, wonderful, imaginative teachers that they might be used. No, sir. George and Herald had evolved into terrifying, boring, and vanguard teachers that they were used to. Mr. Krupp squished between 40-year-old Herald and 39-3/4-year-old George, slapped a sweet arm around each of them. I'm glad you fellas are here, said Mr. Krupp. It's a tough job making everybody miserable, isn't it? It sure is, boss, said 40-year-old Herald. You know, it's hard to believe that you guys used to be crazy kids in school, said Mr. Krupp. Thank you goodness you both starting talk like seriously. Yeah, said 39-3/4-year-old George. One day, about 30 years ago, we saw the error of our ways, so we made a vow to straight up and fly right. Yep, said 40-year-old Herald. From then on, it was nothing but seriously study, strict discipline, and, hey, you kids, cut that out. George and Herald looked nervously at each other as their adult doubles continued screaming at the unfortunate children on the playground. Remember that vow we just made to stop goofing around and start acting more like grown-ups? Asked Herald. Yeah, said George. I think we should vow a new vow. That one was the vow just vowed, said Herald. Let's get vowing, said George. So, as the terrifying battle raged above their heads, George and Herald shook hands and promised to always be themselves. They pledged to keep goofing around and make even more comic books and stop taking life down seriously. "Let's trade you more too," said George. "Yeah," said Herald. "Enough of this sitting still and paying attention stuff." As George and Herald woofed their new woof, something strange began to happen. A soft wind started to blow, the sound of wind chimes began to tingle in the air, and the grown-up version of George and Herald slowly disappeared. They vanished gradually at first. Then, after about a minute or so, Mr. Crab was left standing there all by himself. "Whoa," said George. "You mean it's that easy? All you have to do is make your mind and stick to it, and you can change the future?" "Yeah, I guess so," said Herald. George and Herald walked up to old Mr. Crab, who was looking a little confused, and snapped their fingers. Suddenly, a familiar smile stretched across old Mr. Crab's face. "Well," said George above their heads, "what are you waiting for?" "Yeah," said Herald, "you're getting your butt kicked up there. Go help yourself." Quickly old Mr. Crab tore off his clothes, dashed into school, grabbed the red curtain from his office, and flew out of his window with a triumphant tra-la-la-la. Old Captain Underpants immediately rescued Mr. Crab and brought him back down to the ground. "Wow, I'm sure glad that's over with," said Mr. Crab. "Relax, Bub," said George, "you're just getting started." And with a snap of George's hand, Herald's fingers, Mr. Crab returned to his heroic self once again and flew into the sky to fight alongside his future self. Chapter 22, The Incredible Graphic Violence, Chapter Part 2, in Flipperama. A Fistful of Nose Hair. A sky-high kick in the eye. The tooth hurts. Chapter 23. How the Universe Really Began. Slightly younger Tiny Tippy might have been journeymously and powerful, but he was no match for two Captain Underpants. He fell to his massive robot knees in a thunderous cloud of agonizing defeat. But slightly younger Tiny Tippy wasn't ready to give up just yet. He reached down to his control panel and pressed the nuclear bomb button, which was conveniently located between the strawberry milkshake button and the low-fat mint chocolate chip cookie dispenser. Suddenly, a panel at the rear of the robo-boxer opened up and 160-ton bomb emerged. "You might have defeated me," said slightly younger Tiny Tippy as he pressed the button that started the countdown to doomsday, "but it still get the last laugh." Suddenly, a light on the side of the bomb began to flash red. A computerized voice emerging from the bomb arming system began countdown. "This bomb will detonate in 60 seconds. "No," screamed George. "The last time one of this bomb went off, it killed all the dinosaurs." "But this bomb is way bigger than the last one," cried Herald. "This bomb could blow up the entire planet." "Correction," said slightly younger Tiny Tippy. "I've just activated my gravitation levitator, which will give this bomb more destructive power than supernova. This thing gone blew up our entire galaxy." "This bomb will detonate in 30 seconds, said the computerized voice. "We are doomed again," screamed Herald. "Well," said George, "it was fun while it lasted so long, old friend." "Bye," said Herald. As the two friends shook hands, a huge gust of wind almost blew them over. It was Crackers and Zulu. George and Herald's pets whooshed by them as they flew up to the opening of the radioactive robo-boxers and fluttered down to the command center inside. Zulu's bionic brain quickly figured out the complex control panel at the tingle time travel meter, and together the two animal friends began mashing down the buttons on the switchboard. "This bomb will detonate in 15 seconds, said the computerized voice. As cracked fiercely pecked at the controls, finally Zulu pushed down hard on the "Away we go" button, and the radioactive robo-boxers were enveloped in a giant ball of blue light. Suddenly, the radioactive robo-boxers and the three occupants were zapped back in time 13 million billion years ago. Back to a time before time exists, before anything exists. There was no Earth, no sun, no planets, no universe. There was nothing at all, except for the computerized countdown on 160-ton bomb. This bomb will detonate in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Chapter 24, to make long story short. Chapter 25, the Big Kaboosh Theory. The head from the exploding supernova caused the universe to spring into existence and expand rapidly. As it expanded, it also began to cool along its energy to be converted into lots of different subatomic particles. It wasn't long before these particles combined to form atoms, which combined to form matter, which combined to form stars and planets and you and me and everything around us. Scientists usually refer to this event as a Big Bang theory, but to be honest, the explosion sounded way more like a kaboosh than a Big Bang. I guess you just had to be there. Chapter 26. What have we learned today? Remember, at the beginning of this book, when I told you to be smarter by page 210 than the world's most brilliant scientist, well, congratulations. You know what killed the dinosaurs, who started the last ice age, and how our universe actually began. Unfortunately, this information is not something you can use for any pragmatic benefits. So if you ever get tested on this stuff in school, please don't answer with the truth. I can guarantee you it will not go well. This is the unfortunate fate of super smart people like us. There's a rarely place where we can use our vast knowledge, so we must be content to simply roll our eyes at people, shake our heads paralyzed, and sign that inspiring our song, "I'm smarter than you." For your conventions, sheet music has been provided on the following page. Chapter 27. Meanwhile, 30 years from now. "Where did they go?" cried George as he looked up in the sky where Tippy's radioactive robo-boxers had just stood. "They disappeared," said Herald. "They just vanished with a trace." Captain Underpants and his bearded old twin flew down to George and Herald. "What are we going to do now?" asked old Captain Underpants. "Why don't you go fly into that school and splash some water on your face?" said Herald. "Sure," said old Captain Underpants. He flew straight to the nearest drinking fountain, and in one time at all he returned to his crabby old self. "Well," said George, "what are we going to do now? We are stuck in the future without a time machine." "George," said Herald as he looked down at Cracker's nest. "We got no money, no identification, no nothing," said George. "George," said Herald again, looking closer into the nest. "It not looks like we can just go back to school and start over where we left off," said George. "George," said Herald a third time. "What?" asked George finally. Herald pointed at the nest that Zulu had made for Crackers. In the center of the nest were 3 purple and orange speckled eggs. George's mouth dropped open. "What are those?" he cried. "I guess Crackers wasn't sick after all," said Herald. "He was pregnant." "But Cracker is a boy. Boys can't lay eggs." "Maybe Cracker is a girl," said Herald. "Oh yeah," said George. guess it would make more sense. George and Herald carefully picked up the eggs and examined them. We got to keep the eggs warm until Crackers and Zulus get back, said George. But we don't know where they went, said Herald. We don't even know if they will be back. Then we are just going to have to raise the eggs on our own, said George. That's at least what we can do. Chapter 28. The final chapter of the very last Captain Underpants epic novel. George and Herald and Captain Underpants each hold an egg close to their bodies to keep them warm. Then they started walking. Where are we going to go? Asked Herald. I guess we should try our houses first, said George. Maybe our parents still live there. Good idea, said Herald. Suddenly, a bright ball of flashing light appeared in front of them. The flashing got more and more and more intense until it finally exploded with a big blast of crackling lightning. And there, where the flashing ball of light had been, was the giant glow-in-the-dark robot squid. The top of the robot squid opened and George and Herald Nemes Melvin neatly popped his head up. Greetings, said Melvin. I have come from the past to bring you guys back home. Hey, wait a minute, said George. How did you know where to find us? Let's just say an old friend let me do to you, said Melvin. Okay, said George. Works for me. You see, Melvin continued, when I designed Zulu's robot, I installed a... Boring, said George. Yeah, said Herald. We stopped listening like 10 seconds ago. Well, listen to this, Melvin shouted as he reached down and grabbed our heroes with his robo-squared arms. You three losers and your precious eggs are coming with me. Where are you taking us? Cried George. You will see soon enough. Melvin laughed maniacally. You see soon enough. Suddenly, the giant glow-in-the-dark time-traveling super squid began to shake and sputter in buzzing ball of electrified light. Oh no, cried George. Here we go again. This was the 10th novel by Dav Pilkey. He also made the illustration in this book from Captain Underpants. Wow, this was a long time. I read now 1 hour and 40 minutes straight. I feel that my throat is like falling into pieces. I hope you liked that story, and I hope you write some comments down below if you liked Captain Underpants and what you have in mind. Feel free to check out all the other books I read from him and also all the other books I read at all, because I have a lot in stock on my free ASMR channel. I also make food videos where I eat in mukbang style food, also some philosophical episodes where I talk about life and personal things. So if you're interested in to see way more, feel free to click yourself to my ASMR timeline. And I am happy about every support, so if you not already know what all my heart projects are about, feel free to click under this video around in the description and check all my pages in the World Wide Web, because here is my playground and I have way more to offer. My name is ASMR Katz, and I am a heavily tattooed girl who show you the adventure of ASMR and sound. So I would be amazed if you like to follow, if you like to subscribe, and click on the notification bell to see way more ASMR clips from me. And now I will speak the full evening and I will sleep and I will not say any word anymore and hope that my voice will still be there tomorrow. So have a pleasant night as well, a pleasant day, wherever you are right now. Thank you so much for supporting me, listening to my ASMR, and having a good time together with me here on my YouTube channel.